The air in the back room of the market was always thick with the smell of cardboard and overripe peaches. It was a smell I'd come to associate with my life as it was now. Functional, a little bruised, and fundamentally temporary. For 3 months, my world had been the precise geometry of stacked boxes, the cool slip of a price gun in my hand, and the low, impersonal hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It was a life built on the foundation of being unnoticed, a quiet penance for a previous life that had been altogether too loud and ended in financial ruin. I had learned to appreciate the anonymity of it all, the simple rhythm of stocking shelves and sweeping floors. My routine was my armor. Wake at dawn, walk the 2 miles to the market, work my shift, walk home. My small apartment was sparse, containing only what I could carry from my old life. There were no photographs on the walls, no souvenirs from brighter days. There was just a bed, a table, and a single, well-tended succulent on the windowsill. A small, stubborn bit of green that asked for nothing but a little light. It was enough. It had to be. But even in this carefully constructed quiet, there was Arthur Vance. He was not a part of my routine, but an unpredictable current within it. He owned the Vance Vineyards, the sprawling estate on the hill that was the town's main claim to fame and its largest employer. He was older, maybe by 20 years, with silver at his temples and a stillness about him that seemed to absorb all the frantic energy in a room. I'd see him maybe once a week when he came into the market, not for his own wine, but for the aged cheeses and fresh bread we carried. He never spoke much. A nod to the owner, a quiet word with the butcher. But I felt his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. He moved with a deliberate grace that belied his size, his gaze sweeping over the aisles not with the impatience of a wealthy man in a hurry, but with a kind of calm assessment. And sometimes, for a fraction of a second, that gaze would land on me. It was never invasive, never lingering. It was just a glance, a simple acknowledgement that I existed in his space. And every time, a strange, unwelcome warmth would curl in my stomach. It was a feeling I had no room for in my Spartan life, a complication I couldn't afford. I kept a single cork from one of his bottles, a deep red Merlot. I'd found it on the floor one evening after closing. I should have thrown it away. Instead, it sat in the small wooden bowl on my nightstand where other men might keep loose change or a wedding ring. Sometimes, in the dark, I'd pick it up, feel the compressed texture of the cork, and inhale the faint ghost of a scent, dark cherries and old wood. It was a foolish, sentimental thing, a crack in the wall of my carefully managed indifference. It was a reminder of a world of taste and texture and warmth that felt a universe away from my own. That Tuesday started like any other. The morning was cool, the sky a pale, washed-out blue. A delivery truck from the Vance Vineyards had arrived, its engine rumbling in the alley behind the market. This was unusual. His deliveries were normally handled by a large distributor, not a truck bearing the elegant, curling V of his logo. I was tasked with helping unload, a break from the monotony of stocking canned tomatoes. The driver, a young man with sweat already beading on his forehead, was struggling with a large wooden crate. He grunted, his face flushed with effort. "This one's a beast," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Mr. Vance's private stock. Special order for the mayor's dinner." I moved to help, my hands finding purchase on the rough wood. Together, we hoisted it, the weight settling into my shoulders. It was heavy, solid, filled with the clinking promise of expensive liquid. We were maneuvering it toward the dolly when a shadow fell over us. "Careful with that one, Ben. The '08 is irreplaceable." The voice was low and calm, but it carried an authority that made both of us freeze. I looked up, and there he was. Arthur Vance. He wasn't dressed in the tailored suits I'd seen in photographs in the local paper. He wore dark jeans, worn leather boots, and a simple gray Henley that stretched across a broad chest. He looked less like a millionaire and more like a man who worked the land his fortune came from. He wasn't looking at the crate. He was looking at me. His eyes, a shade of hazel that seemed to shift with the light, held my gaze for a moment longer than was necessary. The weight of his attention was a physical thing, more substantial than the crate in my hands. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a ridiculous, adolescent reaction. "You need a hand," he said. It wasn't a question. He stepped forward, and his hands, large and capable, covered mine on the side of the crate. His skin was warm, the heat seeping through the thin material of my work gloves. A jolt, small but distinct, went through me. For a second, all I was aware of was the solid presence of him beside me, the faint scent of clean earth and expensive soap, and the startling warmth of his touch. He took most of the weight without seeming to try. "On three," he said, his voice a low rumble near my ear. 1, 2, 3 we lifted, and the crate settled onto the dolly with a soft thud. He didn't release his hands immediately. For a breath, we stood there, our hands overlapping on the wood, the space between us charged with a silent, unspoken energy. Then he stepped back, breaking the contact. The air rushed back into the space he'd occupied, feeling suddenly cool against my skin. "Thank you," he said, his eyes meeting mine again. "I appreciate the help. It's my job," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It transformed his face, softening the stern lines around his eyes. "Still, thank you." He turned his attention to the driver, discussing the rest of the delivery, his voice dropping back into its easy, authoritative cadence. I retreated back into the shadows of the storeroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was just a moment. A simple, polite interaction. But it felt like something had shifted, like a quiet foundation settling deep beneath the surface of my carefully ordered world. A door I had locked and bolted long ago had just been gently pushed ajar. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, my mind replaying that brief exchange in the alley. The weight of his gaze, the unexpected warmth of his hand, the low timbre of his voice. These were sensory details my mind snagged on, turning them over and over like smooth stones in a pocket. It was foolish. He was just being courteous. A man like him, a pillar of the community, was probably polite to everyone. It meant nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it did. There was something in the way he'd looked at me, a flicker of something more than casual acknowledgement. It was a look of assessment, of genuine curiosity. Or maybe I was just projecting my own loneliness onto a kind stranger. That was more likely. I had become an expert at seeing what I wanted to see in the empty spaces of my life. Just before my shift ended, Mr. Henderson, the market owner, called me into his small, cluttered office. He was a good man, kind in a gruff, distracted way. He'd given me the job without asking too many questions about my past, for which I was eternally grateful. "Leo," he said, peering at me over his spectacles. "Arthur Vance was in here earlier. He asked about you." My stomach did a slow, nervous flip. "About me?" "Yes." "Said he was impressed with how you handled that crate. Said you looked like you knew how to work carefully." Henderson shuffled some papers on his desk. "He's got a project up at the Vineyard. Something about cataloging the old wines in his private cellar. Needs someone for a few weeks, someone meticulous and quiet. He offered to pay double what I'm paying you." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. Double the pay. For a few weeks. It was a lifeline. It meant I could finally get my car fixed, maybe even put a deposit on a better apartment, one where the faucet didn't drip all night. It was an opportunity one couldn't possibly refuse. And yet, I hesitated. To work for him, to be in his space every day, it felt dangerous. It felt like walking willingly into the path of that complicated, warm feeling I was trying so hard to avoid. My quiet, anonymous world was safe. This was not. Henderson must have seen the conflict on my face. He made it clear it's a temporary contract, Leo. No strings. Said he'd draw up a formal agreement. He's a good man, Arthur. Fair. This is a real opportunity. He was right. It was an opportunity. To turn it down out of some vague, unnameable fear would be self-sabotage. My life was built on practical decisions now, not on the whims of a skittish heart. "Okay," I said, the word coming out with more confidence than I felt. "Okay, I'll do it." He gave me a slip of paper with a phone number on it. That's his personal cell. He said to call him this evening to arrange a time to come up and see the place that night. I sat at my small table, the slip of paper lying in front of me. The 10 digits seemed to hum with potential, with risk. I picked up the cork from the bowl on my nightstand and held it in my palm. The faint scent of wine was a ghost in the air. I was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to the familiar, safe gray of my current existence. The other led up the hill, to the sprawling vineyards and the quiet, steady man who owned them. My hand is shaking as I dial the number. I am Leo, a man who stocks shelves and sweeps floors. I am stepping out of the shadows. The phone rings twice before he answers. Vance, his voice is the same, low and calm, but through the phone, it feels more intimate, as if he's speaking directly into my ear. Mr. Vance. This is Leo. From the market, there's a pause, and for a heart-stopping moment, I think he's forgotten. Then Leo. I was hoping you'd call. The warmth in his tone is unmistakable. Are you interested in the project? Yes, sir. I am. Good, he says. And Leo? Call me Arthur. The next day, I walked up the long, winding drive to the Vance estate. The afternoon sun was warm on my back, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the vines that stretched in perfect, endless rows on either side of me. The air smelled of sun-baked earth and growing things. It was a world away from the stale air of the market's backroom. The main house was a beautiful old stone building, solid and timeless, with ivy climbing its walls and large windows that looked out over the valley. It wasn't ostentatious. It was grounded, as if it had grown from the very land it stood on. Arthur was waiting for me on the porch. He was dressed much as he had been the day before, in dark jeans and a soft, worn shirt. He smiled as I approached, that same small, quiet smile that reached his eyes. Leo. Welcome. Thank you for seeing me, Arthur, I said, the name feeling both foreign and strangely right on my tongue. Of course. Come, I'll show you the cellar. He led me through the house, which was just as beautiful inside. The floors were dark, polished wood. The furniture was old and comfortable, and the air was filled with the scent of beeswax and something else, something clean and faintly floral. It felt like a home, not a showpiece. He led me down a flight of stone steps into the cellar. The air immediately grew cool, and the scent changed to damp earth, old wood, and the rich, complex aroma of aging wine. The cellar was vast, a labyrinth of stone archways and long, dark corridors lined with endless racks of bottles, each one sleeping in its own dusty cradle. It was silent, a cathedral dedicated to time and patience. This is it, Arthur said, his voice a low echo in the cavernous space. My great-grandfather built this part of the cellar. Some of these bottles haven't been touched in a century. The records are a mess. Old ledgers, handwritten notes. I need someone to create a proper digital inventory. It requires patience and a gentle hand. He gestured to a small, well-lit alcove where a sturdy wooden table and a comfortable-looking chair were set up next to a laptop. This would be your station. You'd work at your own pace. No one would bother you. It was perfect. It was quiet, solitary work. It was a haven. It was exactly what I thought I wanted. He walked over to one of the racks and pulled out a bottle, handling it with an almost reverent care. He wiped the dust away with his thumb, revealing the faded label. A 1945. A good year. For the wine at least. He looked at me, his hazel eyes serious. These bottles are more than just wine, Leo. They're history. They're stories. That's why the work is important. I understood. I understood the need to preserve stories, to keep the past safe. I had been trying to erase my own for so long, but I recognized the impulse. We discussed the terms of the contract. The pay was generous, the hours flexible. He was clear and direct, laying out his expectations without any ambiguity. He handed me a printed agreement. Take this home. Read it over. There's no pressure. If you decide it's not for you, I'll understand. His fairness was almost disarming. He was actively creating a space where I could say no, ensuring the power imbalance between us was as minimized as possible. He was handing me control, a gesture so contrary to my past experiences that it left me momentarily speechless. I don't need to take it home, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I want the job. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I saw that flicker again, that quiet, assessing look. But this time, it was softer, mingled with something that looked like approval. Or maybe relief. Good, he said simply. He held out his hand. I took it. His handshake was firm, his palm warm and dry. This time, the contact was expected, formal, but it still sent a current of warmth through me. He held my hand for a beat longer than necessary, his thumb brushing lightly against my knuckles. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture, but it felt like a promise. A question. I let go, my hand tingling. As I walked back down the long drive, the sun beginning to dip toward the horizon, I felt a sense of hope, so sharp and unfamiliar it was almost painful. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was moving toward something. I was walking into the quiet man's world, and I wasn't entirely sure I'd ever want to leave. My days in the cellar fell into a peaceful, monastic rhythm. The work was exactly as Arthur had described, meticulous, quiet, and deeply satisfying. I would arrive each morning as the mist still clung to the valleys, letting myself in with the key he had given me. The cellar was always cool and silent, a world unto itself. I'd spend hours handling the old bottles, my fingers tracing the faded, handwritten labels, carefully entering the details of each one into the digital database. I learned the language of the vineyard, the vintages, the varietals, the subtle differences between the north and south slopes. I was an archivist of ghosts, cataloging the memory of sun and rain from decades past. I loved the solitude, the feeling of being hidden away from the world. But I was always aware of Arthur. He was a quiet presence in the house above me. Sometimes I'd hear the floorboards creak or the distant sound of a dog barking, and I would know he was there. He never intruded on my work, but he found quiet ways to make his presence known. Every morning, I'd find a thermos of hot, black coffee waiting for me on the table, along with a pastry from the best bakery in town. He never mentioned it, and neither did I. It was a silent, daily ritual, a small act of care that felt more intimate than any conversation. Sometimes he would come down in the late afternoon, ostensibly to check on my progress. He'd stand a respectful distance away, his hands in his pockets, and ask how it was going. Our conversations were brief, focused on the work, but I started to notice the little things. The way his eyes would linger on my face when I spoke. The way he'd lean against a stone archway, his posture relaxed, as if he were in no hurry to leave. I began to study him in the same way I studied the wine labels. I learned the map of his face, the fine lines around his eyes that deepened when he was amused, the slight furrow in his brow when he was concentrating. I learned the cadence of his voice, the way it softened when he spoke about the vines. He was a man of deep passions, but he held them quietly, letting them show in his actions rather than his words. One afternoon, I was reaching for a bottle on a high shelf, my fingers just brushing against the cool glass. It was slick with damp, and it began to slip. My heart leaped into my throat. The bottle was a priceless antique, one of the oldest in the collection. I fumbled, trying to get a better grip, but it was tipping, falling. Suddenly, a hand was on my arm, not grabbing the bottle, but steadying me. Arthur's hand. It was large and warm, and it closed around my bicep with a firm, reassuring pressure. His other hand came up and easily secured the bottle, placing it safely back on the shelf. "Easy there," he said, his voice a low murmur right beside my ear. He was standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could smell that clean, earthy scent that was uniquely his. He didn't let go of my arm right away. His fingers remained, a solid, warm weight. I could feel my pulse hammering where his hand rested. I was acutely aware of every point of contact between us. His hand on my arm, our shoulders almost touching, the fabric of his shirt brushing against my own. The air in the cellar, usually so cool and still, suddenly felt thick and charged. I turned my head to look at him, and found his face was only inches from mine. His hazel eyes were dark in the dim light, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I saw something in them then, something clear and undeniable. It was the same thing I felt churning in my own gut. A deep, magnetic pull, a yearning. The moment stretched, suspended in the silent, cool air. He was going to kiss me. I was sure of it. I wanted him to. My own body felt heavy with anticipation, my lips parting slightly. Then, as if breaking a spell, he blinked. The intensity in his gaze softened, replaced by something more guarded. He slowly removed his hand from my arm, the loss of his touch leaving my skin feeling cold. He took a small step back, putting a careful distance between us. "You have to be careful, Leo," he said, his voice a little rough. "Some things, once broken, can't be replaced." I wasn't sure if he was talking about the wine anymore. He cleared his throat. "I'll let you get back to it." And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing on the stone stairs until they faded into silence. I stood there for a long time, my hand resting on the shelf where the bottle now sat safely. My arm still tingled where he had touched me. The encounter had lasted no more than 30 seconds, but it had changed everything. The polite fiction we had been maintaining, that this was just a job, that he was just my employer, had dissolved. We had both seen what was simmering beneath the surface. And we had both, for for our own reasons, stepped back from the edge. The following days were marked by a new kind of tension. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was a heightened awareness, a silent acknowledgement of what had passed between us and the cellar. Arthur still brought my coffee in the morning, but now our eyes would meet over the thermos, and a silent conversation would take place in the space of a heartbeat. His visits in the afternoon became a little longer. He'd lean against the archway and talk, not just about the wine, but about the land, about the history of the vineyard, about the rhythm of the seasons. I found myself opening up in return, telling him small things about my life before this town. Not the messy, painful details of my failure, but the things I had loved. My passion for old books, my failed attempt at learning to play the guitar, the small herb garden I'd once kept on a city balcony. He listened. He didn't just hear the words. He seemed to absorb them, his gaze steady and thoughtful. He had a gift for making you feel seen. I began to understand the subtle power dynamics at play, not just between us, but within him. He was a man accustomed to being in control, to managing his land and his business with a firm, steady hand. Yet with me, he was constantly ceding control, creating openings for me to refuse or retreat. He never stood too close. He never let a touch linger for too long. He was meticulously respectful of the boundaries that our employer-employee relationship demanded, even as the emotional connection between us grew stronger. He was protecting me, not just from falling bottles, but from the potential for his own power to feel coercive. And that quiet, ethical restraint made me trust him more than I had ever trusted anyone. One afternoon, a powerful thunderstorm rolled in from the west. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind howled through the vines. The lights in the cellar flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. A moment later, the backup generator kicked in, but it only powered the main house, not the old cellar. I was left with only the emergency light above the doorway, which cast long, dancing shadows across the racks of bottles. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and then Arthur appeared, holding an old-fashioned oil lamp. The warm, golden light illuminated his face, making him look like a figure from another time. "The power's out on the whole grid," he said. "The storm's a bad one. You're not going anywhere for a while. Come on up to the house." He led me upstairs into the main living area. A huge stone fireplace dominated one wall, and he was already building a fire, his movements economical and precise. He lit the kindling, and soon a cheerful, crackling blaze was pushing back the gloomy twilight. The room was filled with the scent of wood smoke and rain. "Can I get you something?" he asked. "Coffee? Or something stronger?" "Coffee would be great," I said. He disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to me, our fingers brushing. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. The contact was brief, but it was charged with the memory of his hand on my arm in the cellar. We sat in 2 comfortable leather armchairs in front of the fire, the storm raging outside. The house felt like a fortress against the wind and rain, a pocket of warmth and safety. For the first time, we were together in his home not as employer and employee, but as 2 people seeking shelter from a storm. The context had shifted, and the air between us felt different, less formal. "I used to hate storms," he said, his voice quiet, reflective. He stared into the flames. "My late wife, Eleanor, she loved them. She'd make us sit out on the covered porch and watch the lightning." It was the first time he had ever mentioned a wife. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," I murmured. He shook his head, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "It was a long time ago. Cancer. It was difficult." He took a sip of his coffee. "She's the one who wanted this place. I was a lawyer in the city. I hated it. She saw this vineyard. It was run down and neglected, and she saw what it could be. We bought it together. We were going to grow old here." He fell silent, and I watched the firelight play across the strong lines of his face. He was sharing a piece of his history, a piece of his heart. He was showing me his own vulnerability, the cracks in his stoic exterior. It was a profound gesture of trust. "She would have loved what you've done with it," I said softly. He turned to look at me, his eyes searching my face. "Thank you, Leo. That means a lot." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the crackling of the fire and the drumming of the rain on the roof. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. Then he shifted in his chair, turning to face me more directly. His expression was serious. Leo, I need to ask you something. And I want you to be honest. My heart started to beat a little faster. Okay, this arrangement, he said, gesturing vaguely to indicate the house, the cellar, the job. Does it feel fair to you? I'm aware of my position, of the difference in our circumstances. The last thing I would ever want is for you to feel obligated or pressured in any way. There it was. He was naming the elephant in the room. He was addressing the power imbalance head-on, not to use it, but to defuse it. He was giving me an out, once again. He was asking for consent not just for a single action, but for the entire dynamic of our relationship. I look at him, this good, steady man, and all my carefully constructed walls crumble. I am tired of being afraid, of living in the shadows. I want to step into the warmth of the firelight. Here, now, I can be honest. Arthur, I say, my voice clear and steady. The only pressure I feel is the one that comes from wanting something I'm not sure I'm allowed to have. His breath hitched. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound. The air crackled with more than just the fire. The storm outside had nothing on the one brewing in this room. He stared at me, his hazel eyes wide with a raw, unguarded emotion I had never seen in him before. It was hope. It was disbelief. It was a mirror of the yearning that had taken up permanent residence in my own chest. The carefully maintained distance between us collapsed, not physically, but emotionally. The space was no longer defined by employer and employee, by wealth and need, but by two men on the precipice of a profound and terrifying truth. The cataloging project was drawing to a close. In 2 days, my contract would be finished. The thought of leaving the quiet sanctuary of the cellar, of no longer having a reason to see Arthur every day, left a hollow ache in my chest. Our conversation during the storm had changed everything and nothing. The truth of our feelings was out in the open, hanging in the air between us, but neither of us had dared to touch it again. The dynamic had shifted back to a careful, respectful distance, but now it was charged with a new, almost unbearable tension. Every brief touch, every shared glance, was loaded with the weight of what we hadn't said. The annual Town Wine Festival was that weekend. It was the biggest event of the year, a celebration of the region's vineyards. I hadn't planned on going. Large crowds and forced cheerfulness were not my preferred environment. But I knew Arthur would be there. Vance Vineyards was the main sponsor. The thought of seeing him in his world, the celebrated vintner, the respected community leader, was both intimidating and irresistible. I had to see it. I had to understand the world I was so close to, yet so far from. I went alone. The town square was thronged with people, the air filled with music, laughter, and the scent of grilled food and spilled wine. Tents from the various vineyards dotted the green, each one offering tastings. I saw the Vance Vineyards tent, the largest and most elegant of them all, and I saw Arthur standing in the center of it. He looked every inch the lord of the manor. He wore a crisp, dark blue shirt and tailored trousers, and he moved through the crowd with an easy, confident grace. He was surrounded by people, the mayor, wealthy-looking patrons, other vineyard owners. They laughed at his remarks, hung on his words. He was in his element. And he looked a million miles away from the quiet man who shared coffee with me in the silence of his cellar. A knot of insecurity tightened in my stomach. I was an outsider here, a ghost at the feast. I bought a glass of wine from a smaller vineyard and found a spot on the periphery, content to just watch. After a while, a woman I recognized from the market, a notorious town gossip named Carol, approached me. She had a sharp, bird-like face and eyes that missed nothing. "Leo, isn't it?" she said, her voice a little too loud. "I heard you were working up at the Vance place. Arthur's taken quite a shine to you, hasn't he? He's a very generous man, especially to those in need." The words were coated in a thin veneer of pleasantry, but the implication was as sharp as a shard of glass. She was painting me as a charity case, a project for the benevolent millionaire. My face flushed with a hot, shameful anger. It was the exact narrative I had feared, the one Arthur had been so careful to help me avoid. I muttered something noncommittal and tried to move away, but she wasn't finished. "It's wonderful that he takes such an interest. A man his age, all alone in that big house. It's good for him to have company." Every word was a carefully placed jab, designed to diminish me, to define our relationship by its most superficial and cynical interpretation. I felt my carefully rebuilt sense of self begin to fracture. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's all I was. Suddenly, a low voice cut through her chatter. Carol, it was Arthur. He had appeared silently at my side. His face was calm, but his eyes were like chips of ice. He had heard. I didn't know how much, but I knew he had heard enough. Carol's smile faltered. Arthur, we were just talking about you. I'm sure you were, he said, his voice dangerously soft. He didn't raise it, didn't cause a scene, but the authority in his tone was absolute. He rested a hand lightly on the small of my back, a simple, proprietary gesture that silenced her more effectively than any shout could have. It was a claim, a public one. Leo and I were just leaving. He guided me away from the tent, his hand a warm, steady pressure on my back. He didn't speak until we were away from the crowds, near the edge of the park where the noise of the festival faded into a dull roar. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. He stopped and turned to face me. His expression was a mixture of anger and regret. I'm sorry, Leo. I am so sorry you had to hear that. It's not your fault, I said, my voice tight. But the woman's words had found their mark, stirring up all my old fears about dependency and imbalance. It is my responsibility to ensure you are treated with respect when you are with me, he said fiercely. What she thinks, what any of them think, is meaningless noise. It has nothing to do with us. He paused, his gaze searching mine. But her words only have power if we let them. If we don't define what is between us for ourselves, he took a step closer, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth of his body. The air was thick with the scent of wine and the coming night. So I'm going to ask you directly, Leo, he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. What happens between us is ours. Is there something between us? It was the question from the storm, but this time it was not a gentle opening. It was a demand for clarity, a challenge. He was tired of the ambiguity, of the careful dance around the truth. He was forcing a confrontation, not with me, but with the silence itself. He was asking me to be brave, to claim what I wanted, to meet him in the open, regardless of who was watching. I look at him, at this man who just publicly stood by my side, who shielded me with his own reputation. I see the vulnerability beneath his anger, the fear in his eyes that I might retreat, that the gossip and the weight of his world might be too much. My own fear is a cold, familiar stone in my gut, but the warmth of his hand, which is still resting on my back, is a more powerful force. It is a steady anchor in a churning sea of doubt. I can choose fear, or I can choose him. Here, now the choice is mine. Yes, I say, and the word is not a whisper. It is clear and strong. There is a shudder went through him, a visible wave of relief that seemed to loosen every tense line in his body. The icy anger in his eyes melted away, replaced by a warmth so profound it felt like the sunrise. He didn't speak. He just held my gaze, and in that long, silent moment, 1,000 unspoken things were communicated and understood. The public space around us, the distant festival, the entire town, it all faded away until there was nothing but the two of us, standing on the edge of a new and uncharted territory. He finally broke the silence, his voice rough with emotion. Let's go home. He said it so easily, so naturally. And as we walked toward his truck, his hand never leaving my back, I realized that the word didn't sound like a presumption. It sounded like a destination. The drive back to the vineyard was silent, but it was a silence filled with anticipation, not tension. The sky had deepened to a dark velvet, studded with the first stars. I was intensely aware of him beside me in the cab of the truck, the strong line of his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights, the way his large hands rested easily on the steering wheel. The air felt electric, humming with everything we had just admitted, with everything that was about to happen. When we arrived, he didn't park by the main house. He drove up a smaller track that led to a lookout point at the highest edge of the property. From here, the entire valley was spread out below us, a tapestry of dark fields and distant, twinkling lights. He turned off the engine, and the world went still and quiet, save for the chirping of crickets in the tall grass. We got out of the truck and walked to the edge of the overlook. A cool night breeze stirred the air, carrying the rich, loamy scent of the vineyard. For a long time, we just stood there side by side, looking out at the view. The space between us was a living thing, a palpable presence. Finally, he turned to me. In the faint starlight, his face was all shadows and angles, his expression unreadable but intense. "Leo," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "Before this goes any further, I need you to know, this isn't about gratitude or generosity or loneliness. The contract, the job, that was an excuse. A clumsy one, probably. I just wanted a reason to have you here. To get to know the quiet man from the market who looked at the world with such sad, serious eyes. His confession was a gift, a final dismantling of the power imbalance that had haunted me. He was admitting his own vulnerability, his own calculated risk. He was making himself my equal in this, a man who had wanted and had acted on that want. My throat was tight with emotion. All the fear and insecurity that had plagued me for months, the feeling of being a stray taken in from the cold, it all evaporated in the face of his raw, humbling honesty. I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I've been waiting for you to see me for a very long time, and that was it. That was all that needed to be said." He closed the small distance between us, his hands coming up to gently cup my face. His palms were warm and slightly rough against my skin, a comforting, grounding touch. He searched my eyes, a silent question in his gaze, asking for a final, undeniable permission. I gave it to him with a slight nod, my own hands coming to rest on his waist, feeling the solid strength of him beneath my fingertips. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of fiery, pin-up passion. It was slow. It was deep. It was a kiss of discovery, of profound and breathtaking relief. His lips were soft and sure, moving against mine with a tenderness that made my knees feel weak. There was a faint, lingering taste of the red wine he'd been drinking at the festival, a complex flavor of dark fruit and spice and oak. It was the taste of his world, and he was sharing it with me. It was a confirmation of everything I had hoped for, everything I had been too afraid to name. It felt like coming home. When he finally pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones. We stood there for a long time, breathing the same cool night air, our hearts beating a steady, synchronized rhythm. His breath was warm on my lips. "Right?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "That felt right." "Yes," I breathed. "It did." He laced his fingers with mine, his grip firm and certain. It wasn't a gesture of control, but of connection, an anchor. We stood in the quiet darkness, overlooking the sleeping valley, our hands joined. The foundation that had settled quietly beneath me weeks ago in a market alleyway was now solid ground. The door that had been pushed ajar was now wide open, and I was finally brave enough to walk through it. I woke the next morning to the unfamiliar sensation of soft, high thread count sheets and the gentle weight of a heavy arm draped over my waist. Sunlight was streaming through a large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the scent of him, clean earth and soap, and the faint, lingering smell of his skin filled my senses, and it all came rushing back. The overlook, the kiss, the slow, unhurried way he had led me back to the house, to his room, his bed. We hadn't rushed. Every touch had been deliberate, every kiss a conversation. It had been an exploration of sensation and emotion, more profound and intimate than anything I had ever known. It had been a consummation not of lust, but of a deep, soul-shaking recognition. I turned my head slowly on the pillow. Arthur was still asleep, his face relaxed and younger-looking in the morning light. His breathing was deep and even. The arm around my waist was a comforting, solid presence. It felt so natural, so right, to be here. And then, the quiet, insidious voice of my old anxieties began to whisper in the back of my mind. The morning light was harsh, illuminating not just the beauty of the room, but the stark reality of our differences. This was his room, his bed, his house, his life. I was a visitor, a guest. The contract was over. What was I now? The fear of being a kept man, a project, a temporary diversion for a wealthy, lonely man, returned with a vengeance. Carol's poisonous words from the festival echoed in my head. I felt a sudden, desperate need for space, to put my own 2 feet back on my own ground, to remember who I was outside of his orbit. Carefully, I slipped out from under his arm. He stirred, murmuring something in his sleep, but didn't wake. I found my clothes from the night before, dressed quickly and quietly, and let myself out of the room. The house was silent. I walked through the beautiful, sun-drenched living room, the scene of our confession during the storm, and let myself out the front door. The morning air was crisp and cool. The vineyard was bathed in a golden light, the dew sparkling on the leaves of the vines. I didn't have a destination. I just walked. I needed to feel the solid earth beneath my own feet, to clear my head, to untangle the knot of joy and fear in my chest. What had happened between us was real and wonderful. But what came next? How could two people from such different worlds build something real without the foundation being hopelessly skewed? I walked for nearly an hour, following the dirt tracks that crisscrossed the vineyard. I ended up back at the cellar entrance, the place where my new life had begun. I sat on the cool stone steps, the key Arthur had given me feeling heavy in my pocket. My time here was officially over. I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it was him. "I woke up and you were gone," Arthur said. His voice was quiet, carefully neutral, but I could hear the undercurrent of concern. He came and sat beside me on the steps, leaving a respectful foot of space between us. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just a pair of worn jeans, and his chest and shoulders were broad and tanned from years of working in the sun. He didn't touch me. He just sat there, waiting. "I just needed some air," I said, which wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. He was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the rows of vines. "Your contract is officially over today," he said, his tone still measured. "The final payment was transferred to your account this morning. Your work here is done." My heart sank. It sounded so final, so transactional, as if he were closing a chapter. Then he turned to look at me, and his eyes were soft, perceptive. He saw right through me. "That part is finished, Leo. It's clean. Whatever happens next, it has nothing to do with that. It's not about employment, and it's not about gratitude." He was doing it again. He was seeing my fear, and instead of ignoring it or being offended by it, he was meeting it with clarity and reassurance. He was deliberately drawing a line in the sand, separating the professional from the personal, to prove to me that they were not intertwined. "I have a guest house," he continued, his voice gentle. "It's small, but it's private. I'd like you to stay there for a while. No rent, no expectations. Just stay. Give us a chance to figure out what us looks like when there are no contracts or obligations. Give yourself a chance to believe that I want you, not an employee I feel responsible for." His offer was a masterstroke of emotional intelligence. He wasn't asking me to move in with him, to merge our lives immediately. He was offering me a safe, independent space from which we could build something new. A space where I could retain my autonomy, where I could leave at any time. He was handing me back the power I felt I had lost, proving that he had no intention of ever taking it in the first place. The knot of anxiety in my chest began to loosen. I looked at him, at this kind, steady, perceptive man, and I felt a wave of love and gratitude so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. He wasn't just attracted to me. He understood me. He saw my wounds, and he was carefully, patiently, helping me to heal them. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "Think about it." I shook my head. "I don't need to think about it." I looked at him, and for the first time, I let him see everything. All the hope, all the fear, all the want. "Okay, Arthur, I'll stay." A slow smile spread across his face, the real one, the one that made the lines around his eyes crinkle. He finally closed the space between us, his hand covering mine where it rested on the stone step. His touch was warm, solid, and reassuring. "Good," he said softly. A few days later, a local handyman Arthur had hired was helping me move my few belongings from my cramped apartment into the guest house. The handyman, a cheerful man named Dave, made a comment about Arthur. "He's a good man, Mr. Vance. Quiet but good. Haven't seen him look this relaxed in years." His words were a small, external confirmation of what I already felt. This was good for him, too. I wasn't just a recipient of his care. I was contributing something to his life as well. We were two solitary people who had found a point of connection. The relationship wasn't a rescue mission. It was a partnership. That evening, after I had unpacked, Arthur came to the guest house. He brought 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. It was the 2008 Merlot, the same vintage as the crate we had lifted together in the alley. The one he had called irreplaceable. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to me. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes warm. "To new beginnings," I echoed. We sat on the small porch of the guest house, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The silence between us was easy, comfortable, filled with a sense of settled peace. The public test of the festival, my own internal test of the morning after. We had navigated them. Our new bond had been tested, and it had held. The guest house was small but perfect. It was my space. From my porch, I could see the lights of the main house, a comforting beacon in the dusk. I had my own key, my own life, but he was right there. It was the perfect balance of intimacy and independence. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new rhythm. It was a rhythm of equals. I would make coffee in my small kitchen and bring a cup to him in the mornings as he checked the vines. He would cook dinner for us in the main house, and we'd eat at his large wooden table, talking for hours. We learned each other's stories, the real ones, with all the messy, painful, and beautiful details. We defined our boundaries with care and respect. He made it clear that my finances were my own, and while he would never let me struggle, he would not use his wealth to create dependency. I found a part-time job at the local library, a quiet, peaceful place that I loved. It gave me my own income, my own purpose outside of him and the vineyard. It was important for me to have that, and he not only understood, he encouraged it. We were two men from different generations, with different life experiences and different bank accounts. But we found our common ground in shared values: honesty, kindness, and a mutual respect for the quiet, simple beauties of the world. The age and wealth that had once seemed like insurmountable barriers became just part of the context of our story, not the defining features of it. They were facts, not fences. One Saturday morning, I woke up early in the guest house and felt a sudden desire to be in the main house. I walked over, letting myself in with the key he had insisted I take. The house was still and quiet. I went into the kitchen, the beautiful, warm heart of the home, and started making breakfast. I found the flour, the eggs, the milk. I knew where everything was now. I was whisking pancake batter when I felt his arms circle my waist from behind. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his body a warm, solid weight against my back. "Good morning," he murmured into my neck, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," I said, smiling. I leaned back into his embrace, feeling a profound sense of peace. The simple domesticity of the moment, the easy intimacy of it, felt more significant than any grand gesture. He nuzzled my neck. "This is nice," he said softly. "Having you here." "In my kitchen, it is," I agreed. I turned my head and kissed him, a slow, sweet morning kiss that tasted of coffee and the promise of a long, lazy day together. Later, we sat on his back porch with our plates of pancakes and mugs of coffee, watching the sun burn the last of the morning mist off the vineyard. The air was clean and fresh, and the world felt full of possibility. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The companionable silence was its own language. I looked out over the endless rows of vines, the land that was his life's work, his passion. It no longer felt like his world, a place where I was a visitor. It felt like our world. This place, which had once seemed so intimidating, so far beyond my reach, now just felt like home. I thought about the man I was just a few months ago, the one who lived in the shadows, who built walls to keep the world out, who was afraid to want anything. He seemed like a stranger to me now. The quiet, steady love of this good man had given me the courage to step into the light. He hadn't rescued me. He had simply created a safe space for me to rescue myself. He reached across the small table and took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles in that familiar, comforting way. He didn't say anything, but his eyes were full of a deep, abiding affection. I smiled and squeezed his hand. The fear was gone, replaced by a calm, steady certainty. The yearning was gone, replaced by the quiet, solid reality of what we had built together. It was a partnership, grounded in care, consent, and a profound mutual respect. It was a new beginning, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was one that would last. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.